Works for you. I will have a good bit of data on the slides, so if you are in a place that you can see, that will probably go best. But please make yourselves comfortable, and we'll get started in about a minute. I'm sorry? It should be okay. They're very large screens, so, and of course the slides are available in the presentation files on the conference site, truly for accessibility's sake, for you to be able to zoom in, just for you to know there's no need to take snapshots and make a lot of big zooms. But all right, well, we have come to the hour that is appointed, and I'm really delighted to get started with data-driven practices for engaging your existing and potential donors. I'm Meredith McNabb, and I'm the Associate Director for Education at Lake Institute on Faith and Giving. We are part of Indiana University at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. My business cards are very long to get all of that content there. But IU has a school of philanthropy, kind of like the School of Dentistry and the School of Law. There's a school about giving, where we study giving from all kinds of different perspectives. There's sociologists, and there's economists, and there's historians. And Lake Institute is responsible for talking about and thinking about and researching in how faith informs giving. Because of course, as we heard this morning with Dr. Bailey, God is generosity. Across faith traditions, across denominations, generosity is woven deep in the fabric of what faith looks like. Lake Institute focuses its work in 3 areas of looking at research and scholarship, which we conduct our own and we curate a bunch, and we're really interested in how we can distill that knowledge and help folks use it and understand it. We also work around education, conducting a bunch of different courses, and in fact, at the end of this session, I am going to disappear very quickly to go teach one of those online sessions because I'm really bad at time zones. I'm good at many things, but time zones not so much. So I will look forward to hopefully having time for questions at the end, but if not, I will be here tomorrow and glad to engage with folks any way I can. We're also really interested in public conversations, recognizing that talking more about faith and money is helpful. They're really important topics in people's lives. And if we who are leaders can get more comfortable with that and more equipped at doing that, so much the better for encouraging others to come along with us. So thank you for coming along for this conversation. I often get asked questions like, how do I know who to ask for money beyond the people I've already asked for money way too many times? Or things like, where do I find a grant? I am in solidarity with those of you who are waiting to hear news about Lilly Endowment grants and others at this time. I also get questions from folks of, how do I know how much money to ask a donor to consider giving? And oftentimes, those quests for data are absolutely heartfelt for folks to figure out relationships, for folks to figure out, how can I be authentic in this work? Sometimes those questions have some echoes of the sort of transactional giving, sort of the impulse of, I'd like to raise as much money as possible, as quickly and painlessly as possible. Do you have some magic tricks that can help make this happen? Not that I or Lake Institute want to make fundraising difficult or painful, but of course, there are no real shortcuts to the engagement piece of this. The data informs the engagement. It does not substitute for it. We want to help folks to do this work with joy and with integrity and meaning that our religious practices would dictate, and with the effectiveness that some data-driven practices can help steer us toward. So that is our groundwork for where we are today. I want to start with some data. I assume that if you came to the Data-Driven Practices workshop, you are okay with some graphs, because there's going to be a lot of them, so just warm up your data nerd minds. This comes from Giving USA. You heard our friends at GSB introduce that a little bit earlier today. That is a 45-plus year study now looking at all the charitable giving across the United States. It gets published every year in the middle of the year. And I wanted to highlight this piece around that $499.33 billion that were given to charitable causes last year. It comes mostly from individuals. While that hope of landing a whale of a grant is absolutely real and can be transformative, think about 64% of the giving coming from individuals, and then that 9% of that giving in bequest form, which is also really individual giving, just a particularized form of it. And frankly, as you're thinking about foundation giving, and to a certain extent corporate giving, those are also relationships with people that make those gifts happen. Again, those of you who are working on Lilly Endowment and other grants, you wind up with grant officers who you are working through with, and it's really just sort of a specialized form of major donor relationship. Engaging the humans as a part of this matters for the biggest gifts and for the smallest gifts. And of course, as we're trying to do this work with integrity, we're trying to bring together where our organizational goals are and our donors' best interests, and find the places where those things align. That's real basic to this work, but it's at the heart of engaging with donors well. The point is not just to get the gift. One of my colleagues, Rabbi Adam Miller, who member of Lake Institute's advisory board and someone who I teach with from time to time, he once observed that the most successful fundraising campaign in the Bible is Aaron and the golden calf. It was very effective. People were throwing gifts at this cause. And I think we can all agree that that was neither the organization's best interests nor the donor's best interests. When we are doing fundraising well, when we are doing stewardship well with religious integrity, there is a mutuality of purpose and there's a mutuality of joy to it. Hank Rosso, the founder of the fundraising school, the secular counterpart to Lake Institute at the School of Philanthropy, he used to say that philanthropy is the gentle art of teaching the joy of giving. We're helping people to discover that joy. Henry Nouwen put it in such a good way, as so much of his thinking about this went, to say that if the gift is only good for those of us who receive the gift, it is not fundraising in the spiritual sense. We want the gifts to be good for the givers. And therefore, being able to engage them well really matters. I want to point to a data trend to point to the fact that a lot of people are not engaging in that joy. 50% of US households give financial gifts to charitable institutions in any given year. You see that there's some regional differentiation there, but it hovers right around 50% and has held there since 2018 is when we crossed that line. Now, if you are an optimist, this glass may very well be half full. There's half of Americans who are giving to charitable causes like your institution. Hot dog. If you are not so much an optimist, let me point out that the trend line here is falling. And in the last 20 years, that proportion has fallen from almost 70% to 50%. That's one generation. And effectively what this means is any given person that you meet at a party, that you meet in your congregation or at your organization, the odds are even whether or not they give financially to a charitable institution right now. I think so often we think that engagement is only helping them see that our institution is the place where they should move some of their charitable giving, or they should put more of their charitable giving. The story, in fact, for engagement for half of US folks is that they should make a financial engagement with a charitable cause. That is a different story to tell and a different kind of engagement that is required. You also heard again this morning with GSB around and saw the slide that they shared around the proportion of giving that goes to religious causes. That proportion is also dropping a lot. Again, over the last 45 years, it's moved from more than 2/3 to 27% of the giving in the country going to religious causes. Giving as a total pie has grown tremendously over those years, but the share going to religion keeps shrinking to now just over a quarter. That being said, I like sharing this graph to note that giving to religion is still the big kahuna in this work. All those other segments are much smaller shares of the giving. There is still a core of folks who are motivated to give to their congregations and out of religious confidence, out of religious hope, out of religious expectation for what organizations connected to faith traditions can do. I also, though, want to point out that financial giving is not all of the giving that happens. So that 50% marker can be pretty disheartening for those who are not at the glass half full point of the story. I want to point to this study, again, that came from the School of Philanthropy, looking at non-formal giving to charitable institutions, looking at both financial and non-financial giving to just folks, to just people you're maybe related to or know, or maybe to strangers, money and not money. People are a lot more generous. It is not fully generosity as a virtue that has to be awakened in folks. But it does, of course, need to be nurtured and encouraged as a moral value and for us as a faith practice. And our congregations and our other religious nonprofits do need to consider how we're telling the story of what the giving to and through us actually does in order to engage these donors meaningfully. Again, you know this, but I hope that perhaps some facts and figures to back up some of your intuition can be helpful and can help you think about ways that your context may differ, where perhaps you are in a setting where the religious institutional giving is quite strong and quite robust. This may be a way of looking down the highway a little bit at trends that may be coming to an area near you. Thinking about how people are connected with giving, I want to talk about some of the data that looks at the patterns behind how donors are engaging with organizations. The Bank of America Affluent Household Study is one that brings up a lot of feelings for folks sometimes. Not to say that only affluent households giving matters, but this is a longitudinal study that looks at individual families and what giving has looked like in their lives and as they are moving through the generations as well. Also, sometimes I have folks who think, well, I mean, affluent givers, if I had billionaires around me, I wouldn't be at Stewardship Kaleidoscope. I would just talk to them and we'd be all done. This study is actually looking at certainly rich folk, but it's folk who have more than $200,000 in household annual income, or more than $1 million in household wealth beyond their home, their primary residence. That's certainly an affluent household. That is not at all out of range of where many of our communities have folks, out of where many of our organizations may be seeking gifts. So let me just say, I hope that these can be representative givers in some sense at least. The study noted in the last one that came out, the newest one is coming out within weeks, so keep your eyes peeled for that information. Looking at a gentle trend away from organization-based philanthropy and toward issue-based philanthropy. Thinking about whether or not folks' motivation is around the organization itself or around the issues that it addresses. And one nuanced piece to that they broke out a bit was the age of the donor. Sometimes I think we have a sense that perhaps there's really strong and really clear lines of demarcation between generations of givers, and they're not super bright line differences. But again, there do seem to be some gentle trends that are moving in the direction of younger donors being more issue-focused and less organization-focused. Again, I think that tracks with much of our experience for many of us. In the study, younger donors does mean folks who were 40 and under, if recognizing that young clergy keeps creeping up and all those other sorts of things to give some texture to this. I think this echoes some of Lake's observations over the last 20 years that we have called the traditional paradigm and the emerging paradigm, that really track onto that sense of organization-based giving versus issue-based giving. And we likewise have been noting these trends of thinking about whether a giver is motivated. You see the word duty there, and I think sometimes people go, oh, well, duty to give. They're treating it like a tax. That is not what traditional paradigm means in what we've observed. These are folks for whom giving is an honored obligation. It is a holy duty. It is a practice that is bringing honor to God and helping us to practice what we have been taught is right. These are folks who do tend to trust institutions more, and for a lot of them, the making of the gift is the good thing to do. That's full stop where the goodness of giving is. And for these folks, when you present a budget and you ask someone to fund it, there is often a positive response. Contrast that good form of giving with the other good form of giving around the emerging paradigm, perhaps more of an issue-based way of looking at it, and this sense of, rather than a religious duty, more of a grace-filled response to what's been given to you, that I ought to do something wonderful with that gift. You can hear that both of those are good things within our religious settings. Those are things that we teach. This emerging paradigm, perhaps more issue-centered folks, tend to not be as institutional. You all know as well as I that some of our institutions have earned some mistrust along the way. Sometimes these are folks who have experienced that. Sometimes these are folks who just kind of caught that in the water, that institutions need to earn the trust that they would like to have. For these givers, making the gift is not the point. Making the change through the gift is the point. And for them, your budget may help foster trust because you're being transparent about where the money goes and how it is used well, but is not in and of itself a real motivator for giving. They want to give according to their values and want to see how their gift can align and further their values. This is, of course, a paradigm that has a lot of overlap among them. I would suggest perhaps more of a constellation. As you're thinking about your own giving, you might be sensing, yeah, you know, I'm kind of a traditional paradigm giver in some ways. Many of us are very deeply institutionally formed. But I'm also kind of an emerging paradigm giver in others. I do try and give in line with my values or other things. Folks exist along the continuum across these constellations. But it matters in how we engage folks as to how we approach our communications work. Who do we think we're talking to as we're inviting people to make gifts? If we are only talking to our traditional paradigm givers, we are missing out on our issue-focused emerging paradigm givers, and vice versa. If we kind of denigrate the institution, are we really kind of turning off and disrespecting some of our folks who give because of the institutional trust that they have? Again, just food for thought as to thinking about how your givers are aligned. Let me also point out another piece out of Giving USA this year, looking at institutional trust. We live in a real low trust time. I mean, you all watch the news, you know, nobody trusts anybody to do much of anything. This study looked at the question of how much do you trust X entity to generally do what is right? Now, nonprofit organizations and religious institutions came out on top. For those of you who are the optimists, this is great news. 39% at most think that nonprofit organizations generally do what's right. That's a really low bar of trust, and a very low percentage of folks who hold it for the institutions that we work with. And then, I mean, you notice the other institutions here fall even farther. I often have folks who ask, okay, what about this individuals line? That is literally, do you trust other people to generally do what's right? 20% of folks generally trust other people to do what's right. We may have some spiritual problems to address with folks along the way here as well. But again, if we are expecting that our potential donors, that frankly even some of our existing donors, just trust us, that may be something to examine. Particularly in congregations, we have a slightly skewed sample. These are people who have been formed institutionally enough to align themselves with a congregation. And so I think sometimes we can start to think that how they act and how they feel is pretty much how everybody else feels. And that is not the case. The wider world has a really different approach to our institutions and institutions in general. So there is some sort of landscape data to consider. I want to turn now to thinking about some data pieces for your institution, for your organization or congregation, how you can harness your data well. And put that knowledge to use for good engagement. Again, I mentioned sometimes I get the sense, particularly with newer fundraisers or folks who have taken on this role with new vigor or perhaps desperation, that perhaps there's a magic key. Perhaps there's magic words that will get people to give. Perhaps there is information out there that will just unlock a gift. There are absolutely donor capacity tools that are available out in the world. And you may have access to them, particularly through the larger institutions that help to resource our denominations and our organizations. Big organizations can and do use these tools to help discern donors to approach, to help discern what kinds of gifts might be asked for. But they also come with some pretty hefty price tags, both for the subscription to the services and for the weight of managing those wealth management tools. I want to encourage you that small and mid-sized organizations have a real strength here even without some of those tools. You can really shine because you have more data and better data than you think you do, perhaps, and can put it to use in some really robust ways. So number one, using the data that you have is of course, a key factor. If we used half the things that we have, wouldn't it be wonderful? Some of the data that you have is your current giving across the organization. You may be very well familiar with the idea of a giving pyramid, and you may have some critique about a giving pyramid, which can be misused. But as a way of simply organizing your givers, let me commend this to you. It's a basic tool for putting your giving, getting your arms around what your giving looks like. It breaks up giving into different bands. Traditional secular fundraising calls them major gifts, upgraded gifts, and base gifts. Sometimes these words do not feel good in church life, but as a way of, again, wrapping your mind around some of the patterns of what's happening in giving. The way that you construct a pyramid of giving is to take all of your annual gifts and put them in order, largest to smallest. My handy example lets the math be real easy because the numbers are small. But you put them in order, you figure out how many gifts there are total. Don't count your zeros of people who are connected with you but who do not give. That's a different category of folks. But then think about, all right, so in this example, there's 60 givers, your top 10%, your top 6 givers. Your upgraded gifts, the next group, the next 20%, down to that 18th giver, and then the remaining group. At that point, you can start summing up how much of the giving is in each of those segments. What percentage of the giving comes from your top 10% of donors? What percentage of the giving comes from the next group? You can start looking at things like the average and the mode and all those good things from math class. But you can just look for patterns as well. This is really useful data, whether or not this list is anonymous. I recognize that for some settings, the senior clergy, the pastor in charge, knowing the individual household giving records can be very controversial. Lake Institute wants to encourage you to move in that direction, but that may be a conversation for a slightly other time. Even though, if this is anonymous for you, there is good data here about learning patterns. Do you have a whole lot of those sort of square numbers? $100 a month yields $1,200 a year. Do you have a bunch of those kinds of gifts? Those sorts of $100 a year gifts. Are those all end of year things? Are those all for some particular sort of purpose? Those kinds of patterns can be really helpful for, again, thinking about, our base givers are perhaps not as engaged as they could be. What might engage them? What might be a motivating invitation for a mid-level giver to perhaps increase their giving? That is not the only purpose to get people to move up the pyramid. That's where the critique of the pyramid comes in, of people only paying attention to that top level or only wanting to move people up. Again, thinking about relationship and engagement and integrity, that's not always the case. You know faithful givers in your organization who, for any number of reasons, pretty limited in what kind of financial giving they can give, but they are giving with full-throated generosity. Don't send them the letter that says, please consider increasing your gift by 10% this year. That's not a helpful thing. That's not robust engagement. That's in some ways a transactional kind of an invitation. There are absolutely some people who could be invited to increase their giving, maybe even by more than 10%. But that's a different kind of letter, a different kind of social media post, a different kind of conversation that you would make with them. Just a note, the pyramid of giving can also be really helpful as a management tool. If you were leading this organization, would you not desperately want to know who was giving 20% of your total gifts? I hope so, because if that person retires or dies or moves away, your organization is going to experience a significant transformation in its revenue when it might be perfectly normal and natural and nothing is actually wrong. I work with folks who they get in conniptions about, well, we must be doing this wrong, something is happening, the giving went down, what are we even gonna do? And it turns out that someone died, or somebody moved away, or retired, and their giving changed. It's still good to know, but my goodness, what a different conversation that is, or can be. Again, this is a very basic kind of concept, but I hope that it might be one that you can use. It's something that you can tailor to your setting. I mentioned at the very beginning, of course, these slides are available on the conference online site. So if you want to read this a little more closely, you're welcome to. This came from a participant in one of our executive certificate courses, and she graciously said that I could share it with you as a teaching tool in an anonymized fashion. She's serving at a very large congregation, mainline Protestant, and they looked at their giving, and they actually discerned that 5 bands would be a helpful way of breaking up what the giving looks like, kind of in orders of magnitude. This is a very large congregation. You will note that there are 3 givers giving more than $100,000 each to this congregation. That may not be your experience. It certainly was not mine when I was serving in parish life. But here is a picture of a real congregation. The way that they used these bands was to think about what kinds of thanking and what kinds of engagement would be meaningful at each level. And they did include a band 0 of folks who are not yet making identifiable financial gifts to the congregation. You can see that they were thinking about what might actually engage those folks. The band 0 folks, thinking about social media storytelling, about what happens at the congregation, thinking about fun and that kind of joyful engagement with the church, emphasizing the importance of small gifts. This is where crowdfunding, of course, can be a really powerful opportunity for people to make that first identifiable gift to your organization. And thinking about the importance of service, because volunteers get to know the organization and get to know what it's doing and what it needs, and oftentimes are then ushered into making financial gifts. On the other hand, band 3 people giving between $5,000 and $10,000 a year, thinking about how it is that they get more information, how it is that they can be deepened in their programmatic connections, and a Christmas card personalized from the pastor. Some of you may be cringing at this moment, but stay with me, stay with me. Then you see band 5, and they effectively call it personal chaplain, of how is it that these folks giving can be stewarded in a very personal way about what are their financial goals and how are they aligning with the church. Now, I want to point out, and just to make you all feel better, let me put James up, just to name this tension about treating folks differently in the church. I want to hold in this tension about how do you use this data with integrity. Let me point out, in the church in the example, they are in no way saying that they are going to do whatever their $100,000 givers want with the church. They're pretty clear about that their leadership board is very clear about their church vision, but they also do want to talk to the folks who are giving 23% of the church's budget about what that vision is, and try and help keep them coming along with it in a meaningful way. Also, in this schematic, the $100 a year givers are in no way dismissed, ignored, or otherwise blown off as givers. They are being thoughtfully engaged in ways that to them make sense. I'd like to propose that inviting a $100 a year giver to a planned giving event would probably just be a disconnect. A friend of mine has a habit of making identifiable gifts everywhere she visits, every congregation she visits, because she wants to know what the congregation does with that information. I run in a nerdy crowd. But she gave a small gift once while she was traveling through a part of the country visiting a friend. She gave, I believe, $50. And within 2 weeks, she had an invitation to contribute to that church's capital campaign mailed to her. That was a waste of a stamp. That was not a good use of data. The only data point they had was her address. Well, it wasn't the only one that they had. It was the only one they used, was her address. They also had the data point that she was a first-time giver. That would have been a perfectly good thing to maybe reach out and say, thank you so much for your first-time gift. We're delighted that you supported us. Can you tell us, how'd you find us? What? And then she would have said, I was traveling through. All to the good. As opposed to putting her in the mail merge list for every financial stewardship opportunity that was coming through that church. This is what I mean about sort of treating people appropriately, using your data well, and doing our best to love our neighbors through how we are doing this work. Let me just move us to one more now and quote here, and then I think I saw a hand for a question, if you'd like. To just note, I think, again, our sense of grounding ourselves in the integrity of what we do. Are we chasing gifts and toadying after rich folk? Are we ignoring the gifts that we don't think are worth our notice? Or are we helping folks, regardless of whether they have a lot or a little, to meet on the common ground of God's love and make their gift, make their money available to God as is appropriate, as Nowen observes? Yes, go ahead. And I'll try and repeat it for the folks online.
Just to jump back to your 5-band chart.
Uh-huh.
Is the rising and falling, is that how that group has either gone up or down from
Yes.
last year?
Thank you. Great clarification question about the other columns here, looking at sort of what the order of magnitude of the gift was one of the factors. And then out of that, this church looked at how many givers fall into each of those bands. That's that number there. The rising or falling or steady is the trend over time, and then the percentage of the total the total budget being given there. Great question. Thank you. I do want to just encourage you to use the data you have in whatever ways make sense for your organizational structure as well. The thing about bands, it allows for, say, a stewardship team or a board to have input into what does that engagement look like without getting all up to their elbows in people's personal financial giving records, which does not need to be for the whole team. That is getting really beyond what is appropriate for holding it confidentially, though again, let me say, we hope not with secrecy. Senior leaders, we hope, can move toward being empowered to hold that information carefully. But regardless of whether you know the name, thinking about the bands, lots of people can be a part of that imagination of what is meaningful in this setting. What can we do that is authentic to who we are, that would be authentic to who these givers are in some good ways. Thinking about how you can reach the people who you don't know as givers yet. Many of you have access to some very robust tools, like perhaps Mission Insight might be one that you've heard of kind of harnessing big data and packaging it in ways that organizations like ours can work with, looking at demographics, looking at kind of who is in your neighborhood and what are they like. There is a scary amount of data out there about each of us, so if you get the chance to go Googling about yourself, you may be alarmed. It might be even more alarming if you were looking in some of those big data products and pieces. I want to offer some opportunity to look at data about the people who are around you at zero cost, other than your time. And for that, I'm going to invite you to take out your devices. It's one of those fun interactive moments. The Association of Religion Data Archives is a long-time compilation of records. All those statistical reports that you send into the presbytery, that you send into the synod, they filter up and they eventually go out to the ARDA. The ARDA is a nonprofit. They are now housed at University of Indiana, Indiana University, just down the hall. We're really delighted to have them. And it's a way of really accessing some solid data about your neighborhood, again, at a price point of zero, which can be, I think, pretty attractive. As you see there, let me invite you to click on the community profile builder. And if you want to put in the address of your setting, that is great. It's going to offer you an opportunity to really learn a lot about what's happening in your community. When you put in your address, you're going to see first all the religious congregations that are identified in your area. I think the default radius is 2 miles. Depending on what part of the world you're in, you may need to make that 50 or 0.2. You are likely going to recognize friends and partners on that list. I know when I put in the address of congregations that I've served, it surfaces congregations I didn't know anything about. Storefront places and folks that are tucked away that, frankly, I just never got to know. In that way alone, I think this can be a useful piece of information. But kind of, again, along the lines of Reverend Fox's sermon last night, more information may not be the answer if you can't kind of filter out some appropriate attention for dealing with it. The site is thearda.org, I believe. Pardon me, the ARDA. Thearda.com, pardon me. That'll get you to the ARDA. As you see the community congregations around you, this is both a way of understanding how saturated is your community with religious organizations. Where are some places, if you're serving in a nonprofit setting, that you could partner with perhaps and engage some new partners in your work? In the sense of discovering places you've never come across, I think that this opening screen also just demonstrates the fact that most Americans are part of large congregations who are part of congregations, and most congregations are small, if that makes sense. Because, of course, I know when I look up, again, towns that I know, I can point out, oh yeah, no, there's 3 or 4 congregations that have a few thousand members. And then there's all these places that I've never really heard of. And if you get to know those kinds of trends, most of those congregations are under 100, many under 50 people. But most Americans belong to large congregations. Most congregations are small. On the map in the ARDA, you can pick your radius. As I said, that depends on your setting. I'd suggest setting it to the commuting distance of your folks. Again, for congregations, how far do people drive to get to worship for you? For those of you in other settings, where are you generally drawing your constituents from? Out of that, when you click the Create Profile, button, it's going to give you all kinds of data from public records, from census data, from other denominational data, and compile it all into sort of a multi-layer tool that can let you do things like clicking on that whole list of data families that it offers you there around education, around age, around family composition, and the like. There is a data lag in the ARDA. You'll note that a bunch of what is there is just rolling over to the 2020 census because it takes a while for all of that data to get processed. It is not necessarily as up to the minute as some of the more sophisticated products are. And yet, I think that there's something really helpful here that you can work on getting to know who the people are in your community. Things like education may be a topic of data that you've really never engaged about your constituencies. Who are you working with here? That can be a place possibly to talk about educational attainment or educational access, but also about young people. I have encountered a number of congregations who say, well, we just don't have any children. There just aren't any children in our community. Here is a way to test that hypothesis and say, well, there genuinely are communities across the country that are being depopulated. That is a real thing, and that is good to know if you are in one of them. But this kind of data can also help unearth that there's a whole bunch of kids in your community, but maybe they live in the trailer park that you don't go through very often. Or they are a part of young families that are religiously disaffiliated and have never considered darkening your door. These are, again, just some good things so that what you're working with your leadership teams as you're thinking about mission and vision, but also about engagement and invitation, that you are working with data and that you are not treating the plural of anecdote as data. It's not. Many stories do not actually add up to data, but stories give color and texture to the data. You know more than this database does about your community. And if all you have is only the information, it's not going to take you very far. And if all you use is the information, that's not going to get you very far either. Again, when I look at a congregation that I've served in the ARDA, and you look at age levels, the age breakdowns around the community, and it gives you those colored blocks of what's the percentage of young people in your community. The block right around one of the churches that I served is super low on young people. I mean, just kind of devoid. It looks like a depopulation kind of area. But I know that there are 3 assisted livings and a 55 and plus 500 unit apartment building that got built on the block, basically, where that church is. And that changed the percentage. The data alone doesn't actually help you know that what that means. And yet, it does help you to notice, if you hadn't noticed, that there are a lot of senior adults who have moved to the community. You have newcomer senior adults who are different than long-timer senior adults as you are engaging them and inviting them to make gifts. It's the intersection between the data and the stories that can help you then to do some thoughtful work about what is natural to your setting, what is authentic to who you are, what kinds of invitations can you make for folks to get involved, and what kinds of invitations can you make for people to make gifts. There are any number of stories in fundraising letters that I occasionally see in courses of folks kind of inviting people into the nostalgia for the religious congregation of their youth and the meaning that was in it. I don't want to knock nostalgia. I love a Christmas Eve candlelight service like nobody, but I also grew up in the church. And inviting a newcomer into the beauty and wonder of remember Christmas Eve with your grandma when you were young, may not mean much of anything to the people who you're actually inviting. Again, thinking about how it is that you're bringing together your organizational goals, your organizational purpose, who you are and what you do, into alignment and overlap with who you're talking to. Another tool, another framework that I want to bring up here, again, just a basic secular fundraising tool, but one that I think that we can use in religious settings for marshaling the data that we have. Once we have some data, once we've filtered it through some stories, what do we do with it that can actually be useful for what we're trying to accomplish within our settings? These are not cleverly named. You should just know, fundraisers are not really good at acronyms. But the LAI principle as a way of thinking about who your new donors are. Because not everybody is actually going to be your donor. Not everybody is actually somebody who you want to invite or who is going to accept your invitation to give of their time or their money to your congregation, to your organization. Thinking about linkage. How is it that you are building connections to your setting for any given segment of the population? Do they know what happens behind your walls? Do they think of you as the place where that preschool is? Do they think of you as the place that has the good playground? Do they think of you as the place that has the good playground that's locked up all the time? There's all kinds of things that folk may think. What's their linkage? Have they been to the food pantry? Have they donated to the food pantry? Have they heard your bells? Any number of things can be the linkage, but there's got to be some linkage. And increasing it is a way of helping people to come closer to you and to engage with you. Sometimes we have folks who will say, well, you know, I know what I'm going to do to engage new donors. I'm going to figure out who the richest person in town is, and I'm going to go get a meeting with them. I mean, okay, they're in town. That's some linkage. But what other linkage is there? Do they have a friend who goes to your church? Do they have some overlap with the subject matter of your organization? What's the linkage here? And how can you increase it? This is often a place where information is helpful and relationship is better. So how are you working on building linkage? Ability. Here is a place where the capacity to make a gift, the capacity to get involved, is something that also has to be there. There's some sense of people who want to give and can't. How are you making it possible for them to give in ways that get celebrated, in ways that get recognized and honored? How are you working on folks who are giving their time and their talent and not neglecting inviting people to give their treasure as well? But that ability to give, folk can be limited in time, they can be limited in treasure. I don't think they're limited in talent, probably not in any appreciable way there. But then also trying to think about their interest in giving, their interest in getting involved. And again, this is where some of the just generosity is a gift of the Spirit. We can invite folks to give, we can help build connections, and not everybody is our giver. Not everybody is going to respond. But so much the better that you are thinking about helping to target those, and helping to funnel those invitations and make them meaningful for folks. The other side of this is, what do you do with the people who are already giving? How do you help them grow in generosity? Because of course, growing in generosity is not just adding zeros to the end of the gift. I mean, that can be a great way to increase generosity and help fund the ministry and the mission. And yet, we're not just looking to twist people's arms and get them to give more. Remember the golden calf. This is not the objective of what we're trying to do here. But trying to actually cultivate real linkage, involvement, and advocacy. Again, the linkage, how is it that you're helping your existing givers to know more and to feel more connected? That's a big piece of what dictated that chart from the large congregation of looking at the thanking and looking at the engagement practices. What would it look like to help people connect more robustly? What would increase their linkage to the congregation? It's related to their involvement. This is a place where thinking about how you can get your existing donors to be more involved. Can you invite them to volunteer? Or volunteer in a new way? Can you invite them on a tour of something that they don't know about that's a part of your ministry setting? There are all kinds of involvement aspects, from putting them on a board or getting them into a conversation and inviting them for advice. But there's also these other ways of helping folks to be more involved and take that next step closer to the organization. Finally, how are you inviting them into advocacy? This is a place where inviting folks and equipping them to be able to share more about your setting. Again, do they know about what's happening with the capital campaign? If they know and you've equipped them, they might be able to help share that story and share true information, not just the rumors that they heard at coffee hour. If they are folks who are issue-based and your congregation or your organization is involved in a particular mission or issue advocacy, get them involved and to know that your organization is working on this and letting them further that work through their gifts of advocacy. When philanthropic studies folks look at giving, they look at giving time, they look at giving money, and they look at giving advocacy. Those are the big three, as they call it, about how people give. And I think advocacy is something that we often leave off of our list entirely when we're inviting folks to get involved and to make generous gifts of themselves. How is it that we're inviting them to use their networks, to use their social capital, to use their passion for what it is that we do? Sometimes we call this evangelism in the church, but there's certainly other advocacy as well that we can invite people into. There's a whole lot of data that we can pick up about our constituencies, that we can help to know more about who our current givers are, how they give, why they give, what the shape of their giving, what the patterns of their giving looks like. There's also data about the people who we don't know yet, and ways that we can consider how we can engage them most robustly and authentically. And again, to think about where it is that our organizational goals and the donor's best interests overlap, because that's where that alignment is going to come. And it's going to be gifts of time and gifts of money and gifts of self because there's relationship and there's a way for folks to move forward together here. Again, the data alone does not unlock the goodness, but I don't think that the stories do either. I want to encourage you to think about how it is that you can work with data and pull that into your settings in meaningful ways. I want to have some time for questions and discussion here. And I also want to make sure that I invite you to consider if this is the kind of thing that you would like to think about sort of data-grounded and religiously meaningful fundraising. We hope that you might consider being a part of the Executive Certificate in Religious Fundraising. It's offered in a couple different ways. We do an online-only version that goes 8 weeks with some live meetings each week and some asynchronous learning. There is a custom ELCA cohort that'll be starting January and running through March of 2024. If you talk to Larry Stringy, or I think Tim Brown can also help, I know they'd be interested to talk with you about the potentials there. For the Presbyterians in the room, we're also doing an in-person partnership with Presbyterian College and looking at 2 in-person offerings in 2024. I believe in Charlotte and in Jacksonville are what we're thinking about for later next year. Yeah.
Meredith, to add for the Presbyterians, if you are thank you. If you are a pastoral leader, so a minister of word and sacrament, a commission ruling elder, or serving a new worshiping community, you can apply to the foundation for a grant that would cover half of your expenses to do the executive certificate and religious fundraising. So you can check out our website or reach out to your MRO. But I want to say it's about $1,400, the registration, and if you're doing the in-person, you would get half of your registration, your housing, your meals, your transportation. It's a really nice grant. So,
Absolutely.
And it's a wonderful program. I did it a number of years ago. Thanks.
We are grateful for that partnership. There's also scholarships through the school itself that are open right now for 2024 as well. So if online would be the way that you would need to do that, please consider that. The online is an 8-week course, and we meet twice a week for live sessions. Ideally, we anticipate less than 4 hours a week for the course, including all your reading and all your prep work and all of those kinds of things. Trying to make it is a significant commitment, but also we want to make it a significant course to help you in many ways serve as sort of your own consultant there for a little bit, particularly as you're thinking about perhaps working with professional consultants or trying to address the sort of adaptive challenges that are within your own setting that only you have answers for. I also just want to point you to the resource library at lakeinstitute.org. This is open access materials from across a wide variety of resources, but there might be something about the question that you particularly have. There's also links to many, many great partner organizations. We're educators. We want to try and help folks get the materials that they need in order to do the work in their settings. But with that, let me open it up. Comments or questions about data and donor engagement? Yeah.
I just said, what we hear when we talk, what we hear when we talk about increasing church membership, that the trying to appeal or reach out for younger members, they're not interested that our church says Presbyterian anymore. That means nothing. What means something to them is that we're doing a community meal once a week, or that, and that seems to kind of align with what you said about the giving, that the younger generation, if you will, is more interested in what you're doing, not who you are, but what you're doing, and may not even connect with you through worship, weekly worship, but may connect with you through what you're doing in the community. Those seem to align. That's just a comment.
Absolutely. Well, and I think as you point out, it's the institutionally minded folk, organizationally minded folk, for whom Presbyterian might still at least be kind of brand name. Oh, okay, I feel like I can at least test out what's happening here, as opposed to folk who may have absolutely no association with what that means. It just doesn't register. So how else are you telling that story? To help folks trust you and understand you, to know whether or not they can come alongside you and lend their time and eventually their resources to what you're doing. Absolutely, that sense of telling the story is huge. Yeah.
Hi, I'm not quite sure how to frame this as a question, but I'm going to take a stab at it. and it will be asking you whether you have observed something in your work. I am a former advertising and public relations executive who heard a call to ministry some decades ago and found a terrible or terrific resistance that the church often demonstrated vocally about using data for anything. Somehow it kind of took the mystery out of the process, out of the equation. I find this about marketing. And then I was vice president for development for a few years at one of our institutions of higher education, and saw how much data we had available and how useful it was. And yet it seems that whenever you sing this song to congregations or institutions, they're like, no, we don't need to look at that. We know, Joe Pew sitter, and we know this, that, and the other thing. We're just going to do it, without the benefit of analysis. We don't want to bring some sort of poisonous paradigm into the life of our church. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think how I have observed that playing out is that folk don't actually know what to do with data. And so there is some resistance to just don't even tell me that, because what on earth am I supposed to do knowing this? I think, again, that's where the stories intersecting with and the conversations coming around, the data alone are real cold. It doesn't actually help until you start talking through it. And then it can surface things. Frankly, if we believe the Holy Spirit is moving in those conversations, what can rise to the surface of a call even out of it? I think what a powerful background to be able to help people interpret data. I think that's one of the goals that Lake has of how can we help fundraising, which is already kind of scary for folk, or off-putting, or I'd rather not do it, together with data that I don't know what to do with, and it looks like graphs, and what on earth, to then be, and actually your mission and vision are strengthened if you can face your fears here, and get some help in grappling with it. Thank you for that observation. Also, really, what a blessing for your organizations and institutions to have that blessing. Yeah. It can be a ministry, yeah. Any other comments or questions? Wonderful.
Hi, I think I understood you to raise kind of some cautions about you don't just send out a standard letter asking somebody to increase their gift by 10% or whatever. Could you just say a little bit more about that, and when, if ever, such an approach might be appropriate, and when you would kind of shy away from that?
Yeah. Well, I guess I really want to, as folks are first grappling with this, just urge segmentation at all. Is there any degree of differentiation that you can make about, for instance, mailed communication, which is by nature going to be, it's going to feel pretty personal, and it's not very personal. So if I am already giving at capacity and I get a letter that says, can you consider giving more? Wow, I don't feel appreciated, I don't feel seen. You don't know that I am really scraping to make the gift that I'm making. Versus folks who it seems as though there is some capacity to grow. Here, for instance, your non-givers should get a different letter also. You don't want to invite non-givers to increase their gift by 10%. That doesn't matter. What on earth, there's a different communication to a non-giver than to a modest giver than to a really core giver who's one of your major donors. Those are pretty different communications. Again, if there's any way to segment even that degree, that offers just a chance to kind of tailor that material. Again, large shop fundraising operations have staffs that work on this and really can hone in on all of that in many different ways. Addressing perhaps smaller or mid-sized organizations, that basic segmentation would be a place that I would encourage you to start. Again, that can happen whether or not you have access to individual giving records. Your financial secretary does have access to that, and you can say, I would like this material to go to this segment. I'd like this material to go to that segment. And it just can offer, again, a little bit more meaningful engagement to try to help folks connect. All right, last question before I go teach.
I've wondered a couple of times about the value of comparing an increase of your gift with the price of a Starbucks grande latte, you know, whatever. And to me, that sounds a little bit like it's shaming or guilting someone into contributing more, but it also might be an effective tool. So I would like to hear how you've seen that used.
I would urge thinking about what impact does that gift have? And if it is the sense of, I think you can squeeze it out of your budget, that's much less powerful than, you know what, $100, an increase of $100 sends an extra kid to the retreat this year. Can you imagine what that kind of giving looks like? It's not that you're actually inviting them to make a designated gift to the retreat fund for the youth, but you're helping them put a picture on what that looks like. Most people are pretty clear about what their own budgets look like, and if not, that is a different thing about financial education, financial literacy, and those other pieces that might increase ability and capacity to give, but is probably not going to happen at the same time as you're inviting a gift. It's a great question. Y'all, thank you so much. I'm so sorry to have to dash a couple minutes early, but I really appreciate it. Please email me if you've got questions, or I will be around tomorrow and delighted to talk more. Thanks, y'all.